What if the Starks had dragons when the war began? Not fire-breathing weapons dropped from the sky. Not creatures delivered by prophecy or hatched in a dramatic ritual. The Starks were not that kind of house. The North was not that kind of place. What they had was older than any of that. What they had was the crypts. The maesters would argue later, and they would argue for decades, in the careful, cloistered way of men who prefer an argument to a conclusion, about whether what was found beneath Winterfell in the autumn of 298 AC constituted dragons at all. They were smaller than the accounts. They had been sleeping in the ice for a very long time. Their scales had gone dark in the cold, nearly black, and they moved with the particular deliberateness of something that had been still for centuries and was only now remembering it had somewhere to be. But when Bran Stark descended into the crypts on a Wednesday afternoon, not looking for anything, not on any kind of errand, doing the thing he did, which was following the pull of something that had no name yet, and found two creatures coiled together in the deepest chamber, beside the tomb of a king who had been dead for 8,000 years, and one of them opened a single amber eye and looked at him. That was the beginning. The Starks did not choose the dragons. The dragons, as it turned out, had been choosing the Starks for a very long time. Winterfell. The Crypts. 298 AC. Bran was 8 years old, and he had already discovered that things found by accident were more interesting than things you were sent to find. He found the deep crypts by going one level lower than Maester Luwin had ever taken him. He found the deepest chamber by following a warmth that had no source, not heat, exactly. Something closer to the feeling of having been somewhere before. A recognition that arrived in the body before the mind had opinions about it. The stairs went down longer than they should have. He did not bring a torch beyond the second level. He did not need one. The chamber gave its own light, low and amber, which he understood after a moment was coming from the eye. One eye. Open. The rest of the creature still. He had read the dragon books. Every child at Winterfell had. The histories and the accounts and the natural philosophy chapters that Maester Luwin included, whether the children wanted them or not. This was smaller than his idea. Curled beside a larger version of itself, both of them in a hollow beneath the oldest king's tomb. Scales the color of midnight, with frost still caught in the joins between them. He said, "Hello." The eye tracked to him. He said, "I'm Bran Stark. This is my house." The eye did not appear to disagree with this. He sat down on the cold stone floor. He said, "I don't know what you are exactly. The books have different ideas about you." He looked at the creature, at the closed eye of the second one, at the tomb above them, which bore the name of a king that predated the Targaryens, that predated the wall, that predated any record that survived. "But you're in my family's crypt, and I think you're probably ours." The second eye opened. Both creatures looked at him. He said, "I should probably tell my mother." He did tell his mother. This was, as it turned out, the decision that changed everything. Winterfell. Catelyn. What she did next. She descended to the crypts herself. She brought Luwin. She brought 2 guards, who she made wait at the bottom of the second staircase because she had the specific instinct, upon hearing Bran's description, that arriving with armed men would set a tone she couldn't afford to set. She went alone with Luwin and Bran into the deepest chamber. The creatures were awake. They moved when Catelyn entered. Not aggressively, a reorientation, both amber eyes finding her at the same time. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Luwin said nothing. This was remarkable. Luwin always said something. Bran went to them. He went without ceremony, without asking permission, and put his hand on the nearer creature's neck. And the creature allowed this. Catelyn looked at her son and at the dragon, and at the tomb of a Stark king who had been dead for 8,000 years. She said, "Ned needs to know." Luwin said, "I'll write the raven." She said, "Not a raven. A rider. Not written." She looked at him. "Nothing about this goes in writing. Not yet." He understood. He had been managing the gap between what needed to be known and what needed to be said carefully for years. She said, "How long do you think they've been here?" He moved closer with the caution of a man whose scholarly curiosity and self-preservation instinct were in direct competition. He looked at the frost in the scales, the quality of age that was not decay, but patience. He said, "The accounts of the long night, the original ones, before the Citadel edited them for consistency, have references to creatures that fought alongside the first men. Not the Targaryens' dragons. Something older." He looked at Catelyn. "Something northern." Catelyn said, "Send the rider." The rider was on the road by morning. Bran and the Dragons. The Learning. 298 AC. They stayed in the crypts for the first month, not because Catelyn confined them there. They chose it. They moved through the upper levels occasionally, once, alarmingly, through the yard in the middle of the night, but returned each time to the deep chamber and the old king's tomb. Bran went to them every day. He went the way he went to his lessons, with the entire quality of his attention. By the end of the first month, he could tell them apart. They were twins, or the dragon equivalent, hatched together, sleeping together for 8,000 years. The larger one he thought of as north, because it oriented that direction when they were above the crypts and could choose any direction. The other was Grey Wing. Its wings were a shade lighter than the rest of it, silver-grey, catching the light. North was the more watchful one. Grey Wing was the one that moved. Robb came down on the second week. He stood in the doorway and looked at the creatures with the expression he had when he was uncertain whether something was an asset or a problem. Bran said, "They won't hurt you." Robb said, "How do you know that?" Bran said, "Because they haven't." Robb said, "That's not—" He stopped. He watched Bran put his hand on North's neck. He watched the dragon allow it. He stepped into the chamber. North looked at him. He looked back. He said after a long moment, "Father needs to know about these." Bran said, "Father does know. Mother told him." He went back to King's Landing. Robb was quiet. Then, "He went back to King's Landing and left us here with—" Bran said, "With our dragons." Robb looked at him. Bran said, "They're ours, Robb. They've been here for 8,000 years. They've been waiting in the crypts under our house." He held his brother's gaze with the uncanny steadiness that made him seem older than 8. They didn't wake up for nothing. Robb sat down on the stone floor. He looked at the creatures for a long time. He said, "All right. Show me how you talk to them." Bran said, "I don't talk to them. I pay attention to them." Robb said, "That's the same thing." Bran said, "It's really not." But he showed him. Catelyn. The decisions. She wrote to Ned weekly. Not about the dragons, not in writing, never in writing. She wrote about the children. About how Bran was spending half his days in the crypts. About how Robb had developed the habit of disappearing in the evenings and returning with the specific, thoughtful silence of a young man working through something that didn't fit his existing categories. She wrote about the practical questions. The dragons ate. This was immediate and ongoing. They ate the way large animals ate, which was considerably, and the arrangements for feeding them had required Catelyn to have a very specific conversation with the Winterfell household staff. She had told them the truth. There are 2 creatures in the crypts. They are old and they are ours. They require feeding and privacy, and any person who mentions them outside this household loses their position and their tongue in that order. Nobody mentioned them outside the household. This was the North. She wrote to Ned, "The question of what to do with them is going to resolve itself. Bran says they will want to come out eventually. He says North has been looking at the sky for a week. I believe him. I'm not certain I want to know what happens when a creature that has been underground for 8,000 years decides it wants to see the sky." Ned wrote back, "Don't try to stop it. They were here before the house. They know what they're doing." She wrote, "That is not reassuring." He wrote, "It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be accurate." She did not write back to that one. Then, the Raven from King's Landing. The execution. What changed? She read it standing up. She read it. She put it in the fire. She went to Robb. She found him in the training yard. She told him. He went very still. He held the stillness for a long time. Then he said, "When do we march?" She said, "Robb," he said, "when do we march?" She said, "There are things to consider." He said, "When do we march, mother?" She looked at her son. He was 16, and he had his father's jaw and his father's eyes, and the specific, terrible quality of the Stark face when it had made a decision and would not be unmade. She said, "A fortnight. We need the levies." He said, "The dragons." She was quiet. He said, "Whatever father thought, whatever he was waiting for, he's gone. He's gone, and Sansa is in King's Landing, and Arya's ravens have stopped coming. We are going south with 50,000 men. If we are going with 2 dragons," she said, "we don't know what they'll do in battle." He said, "We don't. But Joffrey Baratheon doesn't know we have them." He met her gaze. That matters. She sat with this. She thought about Ned, who had known and kept it, who had carried the information for months trying to find the right moment. There was no right moment. There never was. There was only this moment. She said, "Bran," Robb said. "I know," she said. "They're Bran's. Whatever the political logic, they woke up for Bran. He's the one they know." Robb said, "I know. We take him." She said, "He's 8 years old." He said, "He's the one the dragons will fly for. If we leave him here, we have 2 very large creatures with no rider and no direction. 1 dragon and 1 rider is a different strategic picture than 2 riders and 2 dragons." Catelyn closed her eyes for 1 moment. She opened them. She said, "We go in a fortnight. You have that long to convince North to carry you?" Robb almost smiled. It didn't hold. He went to the crypts. Robb are we? The 14 days. He came to the crypts every morning for 14 days. Not with the expectation of a quick outcome. He had learned, watching Bran, that expecting quick outcomes with the dragons was not how they worked. They were old and patient and had no interest in accommodating a 16-year-old lord's timeline. He came and he sat with them and he paid attention. On the 3rd day, North allowed Robb to touch him. There was a full hour of North looking at Robb with the amber eyes, and Robb sitting perfectly still before the dragon lowered his head, and Robb put his hand forward very slowly. Bran, watching. "He's deciding if you're worth it." Robb, very carefully, not moving. "Worth what?" Bran, "Carrying." North made a sound. Not the roar of the histories. Something lower. A continuous resonance like a very large cat deciding whether to purr. Bran said, "That's good." On the 7th day, Robb climbed on North's back. He expected it to be like a horse. Not a horse, obviously, but some analogue. It was nothing like a horse. It was more like standing at the top of a very tall building and realizing the building could move. North did not fly. He walked to the stairs and stopped. Robb climbed down. He came back the next day. On the 11th day, Bran said, "He's ready." Robb said, "To fly?" Bran said, "To decide if you're ready to fly." Robb said, "What's the difference?" Bran said, "He can fly. The question is whether he'll trust you enough to let you be on his back while he does it." Robb said, "How do I convince him?" Bran said, "Stop trying to. He's been watching how you handle things you can't control for 11 days. You've been handling them wrong." Robb said, "How have I?" Bran said, "You keep looking for the thing to do. The action, the lever." He looked at his brother. He doesn't want someone who looks for the lever. He wants someone who knows when to stop looking. Robb went to the crypts on the 12th day, and he sat, and he did not try to do anything. He sat with North the way North sat, the patient, full presence of a creature for whom time was not the enemy. North carried him to the yard on the 13th day. On the 14th day, they flew. Winterfell. The departure. What stayed behind. The day before the host marched south, Rickon found Bran in the crypts. He came in with Summer behind him and sat down beside his brother. He said, "You're taking the dragons to the war." Bran said, "Yes." He said, "And you're going?" Bran said, "Yes." Rickon said, "Mother said I had to stay." Bran said, "Yes?" Rickon sat with this. He was 4 years old and he processed things in the Stark way, without performance, with the full weight of his attention. He had the same grey eyes as their father, and he used them the way their father had, looking at things directly and not pretending to be looking at something else. He said, "Will you come back?" Bran said, "Yes." He said, "You don't know that?" Bran said, "I do, actually." Rickon looked at him. Bran said, "I've been seeing things, not visions. It's more like the world is slightly more transparent than it used to be. I can see through it sometimes." He looked at his younger brother. "I've seen us in this crypt again. Older. After." Rickon said, "What do you see?" Bran said, "Mostly just us sitting here, the way we are now." He paused. That seemed like the most important part. Rickon looked at the sarcophagus. He said, "Are there more things down there?" Bran said, "There probably are. There are always more things. That's what crypts are. Places where the old things are kept until someone goes down to find them." Rickon said, "I'll look." Bran said, "While I'm gone." Rickon said, "While you're gone, I'll go deeper." Bran looked at his 4-year-old brother. He thought, "Yes, that's exactly right." He said, "Don't go without telling someone." Rickon said, "Lewin." Bran said, "Yes, tell him what you find." Summer put his head on Rickon's knee. The wolf had been restless for days, deciding which person to anchor to. He was anchoring to Rickon. The house was not unprotected. The house was never unprotected. Bran said, "Winterfell will be here when we come back." Rickon said, "I know. I'm staying in it." Bran said, "You're better than me at that. Staying." Rickon looked at him with the 4-year-old's directness. He said, "Someone has to." He stood and walked out with Summer behind him. He did not say goodbye, which was not because he didn't feel it, but because Starks said goodbye by doing the thing they were going to do, and leaving the door open on the way out. Bran sat with the book. He sat with it for a long time. Then he went to Grey Wing. The campaign. What it looked like from above. The Stark host marched south. 50,000 men. The northern levies, the bannermen, the cavalry from the houses that had been sending riders to Winterfell for weeks. They came the way the North came to things it had decided. Completely. Without qualification. 2 creatures flew above them. Bran rode Grey Wing. His mother had taken one look at this plan and said, "No." Robb had said, "Bran is the only one Grey Wing will carry." Catelyn had said, "He's 8 years old." Bran had said, "Grey Wing won't go south without me. She's been following north since they were hatched. If I stay, she stays. And then we have one dragon." 1 rider and 1 dragon is a different strategic picture than 2 riders and 2 dragons. Catelyn had looked at her 8-year-old son explaining strategic pictures to her, and had made the decision that Ned would have made, which was, the children of Winterfell were not breakable, and Bran had been in those crypts for 2 months, and something had happened in those crypts that was larger than her ability to protect him from. She had said, "You wear armor." He wore armor. From above, Robb could see the host below him the way he had never been able to see an army. The actual shape of it, the formation, the vulnerabilities in the march that were invisible from ground level and obvious from height. He sent riders by Raven from North's back, which was a thing nobody had ever done before, and which took 2 days to perfect, and which, once perfected, gave him a communications capability that no general in the history of the realm had possessed. He could see everything. The battle at the Whispering Wood lasted 40 minutes. Not because the Stark force was so much larger. Not because the Lannisters made particular errors. The battle lasted 40 minutes because Robb had been watching from the air for 3 days and knew exactly where Jaime Lannister's cavalry was before Jaime Lannister's cavalry knew the battle had started, and because there is no effective, military response to a commander who can see your flanks from above, while you can see nothing of his. Jaime was taken before noon. Robb landed north in the field and looked at the captive Lannister standing with his bound wrists and his expression of a man doing rapid reassessment. Jaime looked at the dragon. He looked at the 16-year-old on the dragon's back. He said, "Those aren't Targaryen dragons." Robb dismounted. "No," Jaime said. "They're darker. The scales," Robb said. "They're older." Jaime looked at him. "Where did they come from?" Robb said. "They were in our crypts, 8,000 years. Jaime was quiet. He said, "That's," Robb said, "unexpected." "Yes, sit down." Jaime sat down. Bran, what Greywing showed him. He flew south for reconnaissance that afternoon. Robb was in council. Bran had the afternoon, and Greywing had been restless since morning, which meant she wanted to go somewhere. He let her choose the direction. She went south and east, into the Riverlands interior. He watched from her back with the attention he'd been developing since the crypts, not looking for anything, present to what was there. He saw the villages first. The Lannister march had come through this country and had left what marches left. He had read about war in books. Reading about it and seeing it from above were the same experience, in the way that reading about fire and putting your hand in it were the same experience. He kept the feeling in the way Greywing had taught him to keep things. Not pushed down, not performed. Just held and carried and allowed to be what it was. He was 8 years old, and he had seen from the air what war cost, and it was information he would carry for the rest of his life. He brought Greywing back to camp at sunset. He went to Robb's tent. Robb looked at his face. He said, "What did you see?" Bran told him. He told it the way he told things now, with the flat northern precision of someone who understood that the accurate report was more useful than the cushioned one. Robb listened. When Bran finished, Robb was quiet for a long time. He said, "The villages near the Mummer's Ford." Bran said, "Yes." Robb said, "Gregor Clegane's work?" He said it with the simplicity of someone who had made a decision before he knew he'd made it. "We stop it. Whatever else this war is, the villages, we stop it." Bran said, "How?" Robb said, "By being where he's going to be before he knows we're coming. You can see where the columns are moving." Bran said, "I can follow the smoke." Robb said, "Tomorrow morning." They found the mountain the next day. The battle on the Mummer's Ford. Gregor Clegane had won his wars by being larger than everything he fought and by being willing to do the things that other people would not do. He had been marching through the Riverlands for 2 weeks, doing what he had been sent to do, the kind of war that said to everyone watching, "This is what resistance costs." He moved through country like something that could not be reasoned with, because the being unreasonable was the point. He had never encountered anything from above. The dragons came from the east, low over the hills, in the early morning when his column was at the ford. The advance scouts did not see them until the shadows moved across the ground in the wrong direction. The first pass was not fire. This surprised the men who survived to describe it. They had expected fire. The stories were all fire. And what they got was north banking hard, and the displaced air of a large animal moving fast at low altitude, hitting the column like a physical thing. Horses were not designed to respond well to this. The column broke. The second pass was fire. Not the pillar of flame that consumed armies. The controlled and directed thing of a creature that was old enough to know exactly what it was doing. It found the specific targets. The men who had regrouped. The cavalry trying to reform. The wagons that carried the material of the march. It did not find the villages. Greywing, smaller and faster, had been making passes at the flanks. Not fire, presence. The enormous presence of a creature that had been underground for 8,000 years, and had decided it had opinions about what was happening at this ford. The mountain's column scattered. Robb landed in the field. He looked at what remained. He said to the officer beside him, "Send word to the nearest villages. Tell them it's over. Tell them they're under the protection of the North now. That means something." The officer sent the riders. Bran landed Greywing and slid down with the ease that had been building over weeks. He said, There are 3 more columns, west of here, Robb said. Show me on the map. They went to the map. Catelyn and Jaime. What wasn't said. She handled the prisoner. Jaime was housed well. Not from mercy, but from calculation. He was in a tent with guards outside and food that was the same as what Robb ate, and a chair rather than the ground. She sat across from him. She said, "You know why I'm here." He said, "Cersei." She said, "My daughters. First." He looked at her. "They're alive. Sansa is being managed. Cersei has been managing her carefully since your husband." He stopped. She said, "Say it." He said, "Since your husband was executed." The word in the room. She had been carrying it for weeks, and it had not become lighter for the carrying, but she had become better at not showing the weight. She said, "Arya." He said, "I don't know where Arya is. I'm telling you as a fact, not as a threat. She was last seen at the Red Keep, and then she wasn't, and the search turned up nothing." He held her gaze. "Which suggests she's capable." Catelyn said, "She's 9 years old." Jaime said, "She's Ned Stark's daughter." He said it with the specific quality of a man who had known Ned Stark and was applying that knowledge. "She got out. I'd put coin on it." Catelyn said, "What do you want?" He said, "To go home." She said, "What will it take?" He said, "An exchange. I have value to Cersei. Your daughters have value to you. There's a transaction available if both parties want it." She said, "You're not in a position to negotiate terms. You're my prisoner." He said, "And you have 2 dragons, which means you're going to win this war. Which means the question becomes not whether you win, but what the realm looks like when you do." He held her gaze. "Cersei will keep fighting. But if there's a way to end this faster, I can talk to her. I'm the only person in the world she listens to when she doesn't want to." Catelyn looked at him. She said, "You killed Aerys Targaryen." He said, "Yes." She said, "He ordered the wildfire, the caches under King's Landing." He said, "How did you—" She said, "Ned told me. Everything." She held his gaze. "He spent years not knowing what to do with what he knew about you, and ran out of time." The tent was quiet. Jaime said, "I've been called the Kingslayer my whole adult life. He called me that. He never asked why." Catelyn said, "He knew why. Eventually." She stood. "I'll send a raven to Cersei under your name. You tell me what to say, and I'll decide whether to say it." She looked at him. "If you're lying to me," he said, "I know what you have outside this tent." She said, "Yes." He said, "I'm not lying to you." She believed him. Not because she was naive. She believed him because the grief in what he'd said about Ned was not the grief of a man performing for an audience. She went to write the Raven. King's Landing. Cersei. What she understood. The Raven from Jaime arrived on a Thursday. She read it twice and sat in the solar for 3 hours. The content was, "The Starks have dragons. Not Targaryen dragons, something older. 2 of them. Robb Stark rides one. The smaller boy rides the other. I am well treated. The strategic situation has changed significantly." She put the Raven down. She went to the window, the city below. She had been managing it. Managing Joffrey. Managing the court. Managing the specific daily disaster of a reign that had been terrible since the first day. She had been holding it together through will and ruthlessness, and the Lannister name, which was a currency that was debasing itself by the week. And now the Starks had dragons. She called Tyrion. He arrived and read her face and said nothing. She said, "The Starks have dragons." He said, "I know." She looked at him. He said, "I had a report from a rider who escaped the Ford engagement 2 days ago." She said, "And you didn't?" He said, "I was deciding what to tell you and how, and whether anything could be done about it. The answer to the 3rd question determined my approach to the first 2. She said, "The answer to the third question. He said, "Nothing can be done militarily, which means the question isn't how we fight. The question is what we want, and whether we can get it without fighting." She said, "What I want is my children's safety." He said, "I know." She said, "Joffrey." He said, "Cersei, Joffrey is not going to get better at being king. He has been getting worse at being king since he became king. The question of what happens to the throne is separate from the question of what happens to your children." "I want to help with the second," she said. "And the first?" He said, "The throne is going to the Starks. That's the military reality. What I want to know is what the Starks want with it, because that determines whether what comes next is a catastrophe or just a very uncomfortable transition." Cersei looked at the window. She said, "Write to Catelyn Stark." He said, "What do you want me to say?" She said, "I want to know what she wants for my children. She's a mother. She'll understand the question." He said, "And Joffrey?" She was quiet for a long time. She said, "Joffrey needs to not be in this city when Robb Stark arrives. Somewhere safe. Myrcella and Tommen safe." She set the cup down. "And I want it over." Tyrion said, "You've never said that before." She said, "I've been trying to win. Now I'm trying to survive, and to keep my children alive." She looked at him. "Write to Catelyn Stark." He wrote. Catelyn. The reply. The letter from Tyrion Lannister arrived while Robb was out on reconnaissance. Catelyn read it herself, twice, and then sat with tea for an hour before she showed it to anyone. The letter was extraordinary. Tyrion Lannister wrote with the directness of a man who had decided that indirection was more expensive than honesty. He said, "Cersei Lannister has authorized me to negotiate a settlement. She wants her children's safety guaranteed. She wants Joffrey allowed to go. The Westerlands, or Essos. She will accept the terms that keep them alive." He said, "In exchange, she will withdraw the Lannister forces from any engagement with the Stark host." He said, "I am telling you this because I believe Cersei means it, and because I believe you are the person in this negotiation capable of recognizing sincerity and using it." Catelyn sat with the letter. She thought about what she actually wanted. She wanted her daughters. She wanted Sansa out of King's Landing and Arya found. She wanted Robb alive at the end of this. She wanted the realm to have something that worked at the other end of the fighting. She wrote back. Her letter said, "The children are not our enemies. They will be safe. Tyrion Lannister may come to this camp under safe passage, and we will discuss the terms that end this without the walls of King's Landing burning. I have the dragons. I am not interested in burning things. I am interested in getting my daughters back and establishing a realm that works." She wrote, "Joffrey Baratheon will not remain in Westeros. Essos, with enough gold to survive and not enough to make an army." She wrote, "Come quickly. The longer this runs, the harder it is to stop." She sent the raven. She went to tell Robb what she'd done. Robb and Catelyn. The argument they did not have. She expected an argument. She found him at the edge of camp at dusk, looking south. She told him what she'd done. He listened. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "The children." She said, "Yes." He said, "Myrcella and Tommen aren't responsible." She said, "No." He said, "Joffrey will try to come back." She said, "Eventually. People who are sent away try to come back. That's when we deal with it." He said, "You're giving him time to build something." She said, "I'm giving him enough gold and a far enough destination that building something meaningful takes longer than we'll need." She met his gaze. "What I'm not giving him is the legitimacy of dying as a martyr king. What I'm not giving the Westerlands is a dead child to mourn and rally around." He turned to look at her. She said, "I know what you want." He said, "Father." She said, "Your father is dead, and nothing we do to Joffrey Baratheon brings him back, and everything we do to Joffrey Baratheon shapes what the realm becomes afterward. She held his gaze. We have 2 dragons, Robb. We are going to win this war. The question is what we win. He looked at the south. He said, You've been planning this for a long time. She said, Since your father left for King's Landing. He looked at her. She said, Ned was the best person I have ever known. He was not a political strategist. He believed that doing the right thing was enough, and that belief cost him everything. She said it without bitterness, just fact. I learned from watching him. I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to manage how it lands. He said, That sounds cold. She said, It sounds like I intend to win. He said, Invite Tyrion Lannister to camp. I want to meet him. She said, He's on his way. Robb turned and looked at her. She said, I invited him before I came to you. You needed to arrive at this conclusion on your own. I was fairly confident you would, but you needed to get there. And if I'd told you what I wanted before you thought it through yourself, you'd have spent the negotiation feeling managed. He looked at her for a long moment. He said, That's the most Stark thing anyone has ever done. She said, Your father did it to me repeatedly. I learned. He almost laughed. He almost laughed, and then didn't quite. And the not quite was its own kind of grief. He said, What do we need to know before Tyrion arrives? She sat down beside him. She started telling him what they needed to know. Tyrion, in camp. What he found. He arrived under a white flag with 2 guards and a mental inventory of everything he knew about Catelyn Tully Stark, which was considerable. What he found was not what he expected. He had expected a northern camp. Cold, sparse, the general cultural impression of the north, as a place where comfort was something other people did. What he found was a camp that worked. Functional, the camp of an army that had been solving problems on the march, and had solved most of them. He found at the center of it, the dragons. He had known intellectually that there would be dragons. He had built a model. The model was not adequate. He stood 50 feet from north and looked at the creature, and the creature looked back at him with the amber eyes. He said to the guard beside him, Considerably larger in person. North turned away. Tyrion took this as a compliment. He was brought to Catelyn Stark, who received him in a tent with Robb Stark standing beside her, and the specific quality of a room arranged to communicate exactly what they wanted to communicate. He looked at Catelyn. She looked at him. He said, You're exactly as Ned described. She said, He described me to you. He said, He didn't mean to. He was talking about a problem and let too much slip. It was the only time I saw him do that. He sat without being invited. He cared about you in a way that made him briefly imprecise. That was a compliment. She held his gaze. He said, I'm here because I believe we want the same thing. She said, You believe I want my daughters safe and the war over. He said, I believe you want a realm that works when this is done. The daughters are the price of the conversation. The realm is the actual subject. Robb said from beside Catelyn, Which is? Tyrion looked at the 16-year-old with the dragon outside his tent. He said, You. He held his gaze. You're going to be king. The question is what kind? I have spent 30 years learning what doesn't work. That information has value. Robb said, Why should we trust you? Tyrion said, You shouldn't. Not yet. He looked at Catelyn. I'm proposing an arrangement where you don't need to trust me, because everything I do is visible and verifiable. I tell you what I know. You check it. It's right. You decide if the next piece is worth hearing. She said, What do you know? He said, Where every Lannister force is currently deployed, what their orders are, what Cersei has been planning for the past 6 months. He paused. And I know where Arya Stark is. The room changed. He watched it change. watched Catelyn's face do the thing that faces did when something they had been carrying for a very long time was about to be put down. She said, "Where?" He said, "She's with the Brotherhood, without banners, moving through the Riverlands. She's alive and she's fine." Catelyn said, "How do you know?" Tyrion said, "Because I pay people to know things. It's the primary skill I've developed in 30 years of having no other useful attributes." She said, "Get me a rider. I want to send a raven tonight." He said, "I can do better. I know which camp they're near. We can have riders to her in 2 days." Robb said, "Send them." He wrote the note. The negotiation. What was agreed. It lasted 3 days. Tyrion was a better negotiator than Catelyn had expected, which was considerable. She had expected a quick wit and the specific Lannister habit of mistaking cleverness for wisdom. What she got was someone who understood what all the parties actually wanted beneath what they said they wanted, and who could find the arrangement where they overlapped. The terms: Sansa to be released and returned to the Stark host within a week, under safe escort. Joffrey Baratheon to depart for Essos within 2 weeks, not named as exile, named as a voluntary withdrawal. Tyrion's suggestion, and a good one: exile made martyrs. Myrcella and Tommen to remain in Westeros as wards. Not hostages. Catelyn had been specific about the word, because the word mattered. Cersei herself was the question. Catelyn was blunt. Cersei in King's Landing with resources and a grudge was a specific and ongoing problem. Cersei in the Westerlands, away from the capital, was a different calculation. Tyrion said, "She won't like it." Catelyn said, "She doesn't have to like it." He said, "She will make life." She said, "She can make whatever life she wants in Casterly Rock. The problem I need to solve is a Cersei Lannister in King's Landing with access to the capital's resources and 15 years of established networks." She looked at him. "That problem I'm solving?" He said, "She'll try to come back." She said, "People try to do things. We manage what they try to do." She held his gaze. "That's the job." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "You're much better at this than your husband was." She said, "My husband was better at everything that required being honorable. I'm better at everything that requires being practical. We were well matched." He said, "I'm sorry he's gone." She looked at him. He said, "I mean that. He was the best argument against the system I've spent my life in. His death made that argument harder to maintain." She said, "Then maintain it anyway. That's what arguments require." He said, "Yes." The terms were written. They were signed. Sansa. The return. She was brought to camp on the 5th day. Sansa arrived at the edge of camp and stepped out of the carriage and stood in the late afternoon light and looked at the army around her. She was looking for her mother. Catelyn met her before she had taken 3 steps. There was a moment, a private, enormous moment, that was not for observation. Then Robb. He was beside Catelyn, and Sansa saw him, and something crossed her face that was relief and grief and the specific complicated love of siblings who have been apart in difficult circumstances. Robb said, "You're all right," she said. Yes. She stopped. She looked at him. She looked at the camp around them. She looked at North, who was watching from a distance with the amber eyes. She said, "Is that—" Robb said, "Yes." She said, "They're real." He said, "Very." He looked at his sister. "Come inside. There's a lot to tell you." She looked at him. She looked at her mother. She said, "Is Arya—" Catelyn said, "She's coming. 2 days." Sansa's face. The specific, enormous relief of 2 days, which was a fixed point in the future. She said, "2 days." Catelyn said, "She's safe. She's been Arya. We'll tell you everything inside." They went inside. Arya, how she arrived. She walked in from the east on the 4th morning, not with the riders Tyrion had sent. The riders had found the Brotherhood's camp and found the Brotherhood, but Arya had left the Brotherhood 2 days before the riders arrived, which the Brotherhood recounted with the weary respect of men who had spent 2 months keeping track of a 9-year-old and had found it harder than keeping track of armies. She walked in, and the first person who saw her was a northern soldier on perimeter watch who said, "Who are you?" She said, "Arya Stark." "Where's my mother?" He pointed. She walked in the direction he pointed, past horses and campfires and the general working noise of an army on campaign. She walked with needle at her hip, and the specific quality of someone who has been walking a long time and had stopped noticing it. She found Catelyn before Catelyn found her. Catelyn was in the middle of a conversation with Tyrion Lannister when Arya walked into the tent. She stopped. The conversation stopped. Catelyn turned. Arya said, "You're Tyrion Lannister?" He said, "Yes." She said, "You're small." He said, "Yes." She looked at him with the assessment of someone who had been cataloguing the world's people for 9 years. She said, "Sansa says you're not completely terrible." He said, "That's the nicest thing anyone in this camp has said to me." Arya turned to Catelyn. There was a moment of the specific gravity of two people measuring the distance between where they were and where they should be. Then Catelyn stepped forward. Arya let herself be held. She was 9 years old, and she had been alone for a very long time, and she held on. When Arya stepped back, she had the face she would have for the rest of her life. Her father's determination, and her mother's exactitude, and something else. Something the months had put there. That was entirely hers. She said, "Where are the dragons?" And they went to see the dragons. Bran and Arya. The crypts explained. Bran explained it the way he explained things, completely and without softening. He said, "There are chambers below the known crypts that nobody had mapped. The deepest one is under the tomb of the first king in the north, the actual first king, the one before writing." He said, "North and Grey Wing were curled together beside the tomb. I don't think they were sleeping, exactly. I think they were waiting. There's a difference between sleeping and waiting, and they felt like the second one." Arya said, "Waiting for what?" Bran said, "For us, for the family, for Starks to come down far enough to find them." She said, "Why didn't anyone find them before?" He said, "Nobody went that far down before. I went further, because there was something down there that wanted me to come." Arya said, "Do they talk to you?" He said, "No. It's more like, you know how you know something before you know it. Before the thought forms." She said, "Yes." He said, "It's like that." She looked at Grey Wing, who was nearby, watching with the amber eyes. She said, "Can I?" He said, "Hold out your hand." She held out her hand. Grey Wing looked at it. Arya held very still. Grey Wing lowered her head. Arya's hand touched the scales, which were warm in the way that nothing underground should have been warm. She said, "Oh." Bran said, "Yes." She held her hand there for a long time. Bran appeared beside her. He said, "She likes you." She said, "How can you tell?" He said, "She's still." She said, "She was still before I touched her." He said, "That's a different stillness." She looked at her brother with the uncanny eyes. She said, "In the stories, the heroes always have the dragons." Bran said, "The Targaryens had the dragons for 400 years. They came west from old Valyria." He looked at Grey Wing. "Ours were here first." He looked at Arya. "The stories are wrong about who the dragons belong to." Arya said, "And they chose us." He said, "They chose the North. We're the North." She sat beside him. She said, "What happens now?" He said, "Now we go to King's Landing. Then Robb is king." She said, "He's going to hate it." He said, "He already hates it. He's been saying so for a month." She said, "Does he know he hates it?" Bran said, "Everyone knows he hates it. He keeps saying it." Arya said, "Good. That's when you're usually right." King's Landing. The arrival. Joffrey was gone before they arrived. He had departed 2 days before the Stark host reached the Blackwater, with a retinue and a ship and a purse, and the specific expression of someone who had decided this was a tactical retreat and not an ending. Cersei had watched him go from the walls of King's Landing. She was still there when the dragons appeared on the horizon. The city did not panic, which was the outcome Catelyn had been working toward with the ravens she'd been sending for 2 weeks. She had sent word through every channel. "We are coming. The dragons will not harm the city. The people of King's Landing are not our enemies. Prepare to receive the northern host." The city watched from the walls as North and Greywing circled the city once at height. Visible, enormous, present, and not on fire. The gates opened. Robb rode north to the gates and dismounted outside the city walls. You rode a dragon to the enemy. You walked through the gates of the city you were taking charge of. One was war. The other was governance. He walked through the gates. The city was full of people watching him with the complicated expression of a city that has been through a great deal and is deciding what to feel about what was arriving. He looked at them. He was 16 years old, and he had taken half the realm in 2 months, and he had a dead father and 2 dragons and a crown he didn't want. He said, to the crowd and the street, "We're not here to take anything from you. We're here to fix what was broken." It was not a great speech. He would give better ones later, but he meant it completely, and the city heard that. He went to the throne room. He stood in front of the throne. He looked at it for a long time. He sat down in it. The iron cut into his back. He shifted. He found the least bad position. He stayed. Catelyn. The day after, what she built. She had a list. An actual list, written in her hand, sitting on the desk in what had been the hands' rooms and was now hers. Long and specific and organized by urgency. Item 1. The small council. Dissolved in the first meeting. She told the members thank you for their service, and that new appointments would be made within a week. She needed people who would help Robb, rather than manage him. Tyrion, for coin. Not the appointment she had planned. The correct appointment now. He was the finest mind in the room on questions of money, and she had verified this over 3 days of watching him work. Varys remained. She had made her peace with Varys by telling him, provisionally. He had said, fair, and had given her 3 pieces of information she hadn't asked for and needed. She was keeping him. Item 7. Sansa. Sansa was 13 years old, and she had been through 6 months of the King's Landing Court, which was an education nobody had asked her to have, and that she had absorbed entirely. Catelyn went to her. She found Sansa by the window with a letter she was writing. Not reading, writing. Catelyn said, "What are you writing?" Sansa said, "A letter to Lady Olenna Tyrell. I've been thinking about the Reach. The Tyrells didn't commit to either side, and they're the largest grain producer in the realm. Robb is going to need them." She held the letter out. "I know Lady Olenna. We spoke at court. I know what she wants." Catelyn read the letter. She put it down. She looked at her daughter. She said, "How long have you been planning this?" Sansa said, "Since October. I didn't have anything useful to do in King's Landing except watch. So I watched." Catelyn said, "Send the letter." Sansa said, "I thought you might want to..." Catelyn said, "I'll read everything you write before it's sent, but write everything you think. I'll tell you when I disagree." Sansa looked at her. Catelyn said, "You're 13 years old, and you have better intelligence about the Reach than I do. That's information I intend to use." Sansa said, "Is that me helping you, or you letting me feel useful?" Catelyn said, "Both. That's usually how it works." Sansa sent the letter. Lady Olenna replied in 8 days with an invitation to meet. The meeting lasted one afternoon. The Reach came in. Bran. What the dragons wanted. He understood gradually that they had come south for a reason. Not for the war. The war was incidental. The dragons had been waiting in the crypts for 8,000 years, through previous wars and previous crises, and had not stirred for any of them. He went to the top of the Red Keep on a morning 2 weeks after the arrival, and he sat with both of them, North and Greywing beside him, looking north. North looked north, not south, not at the city or the harbour. North. Greywing looked north. The same cold pressure that he had felt in the crypts, the directional wrongness that had no name yet, but that he had been aware of since before he could speak. He went to Robb. Robb was in the throne room with Catelyn and Tyrion. He looked up when Bran came in with the expression of a man grateful for an interruption. Bran said, "The dragons want to go north." The room was quiet. Catelyn said, "North how far?" Bran said, "Beyond the wall." Tyrion said, "That's..." Bran said, "They've been in the crypts for 8,000 years. The last time they came out was the Long Night." He looked at Robb. "I don't think the war was why they woke up." Robb said, "The Watch reports." Catelyn said, "What reports?" Robb said, "The Night's Watch has been sending reports south for 30 years about the cold front and the missing rangers and the dead things beyond the wall. Nobody's been reading them." Tyrion said, carefully, "I've been reading them." Everyone looked at him. He said, "For 2 years. I visited the wall and took the reports because they were real, and nobody else was treating them as real, and I found that disturbing." Catelyn said, "You've known for 2 years and you didn't..." He said, "Who would I tell? Joffrey? Cersei?" He looked at her. "I was waiting for someone who would take it seriously, someone with the resources to do something about it." He gestured at the room. "I appear to have found them." Bran said, "The dragons were here first. They woke up because the thing that needs fire is building again. This isn't the end of what we came south to do. The south is the beginning." Robb said, "How long do we have?" Bran said, "Long enough to do this right, and not long enough to wait." Robb said, "What do you need?" Bran said, "The Watch, Dragonglass, people who will actually look at what the reports say, and for us to go north eventually, both dragons, when the time comes." Tyrion said to the room, "I want to note that our primary strategic intelligence is coming from an 8-year-old and a dragon." Catelyn said, "That appears to be the situation." Tyrion said, "I'm not objecting, I'm noting." Robb said, "Then let's start doing this right." The Wall. What Robb built. A year into the reign, the list was shorter. Not short, shorter. Governance was the specific activity of solving problems that produced other problems, which Robb had now accepted as its defining characteristic. The small council worked. Tyrion had an opinion about everything and said it in the manner of someone who had been told his opinions weren't useful for 30 years and was making up for lost time. Sansa had opinions stated with a precision that Tyrion found both admirable and occasionally infuriating. The meeting of those two approaches produced a specific, productive friction that Catelyn had told Robb was the best kind. He had learned to believe her. The Reach was allied. Marguerite Tyrell was in the capital, and she was everything Sansa's letter to Olenna had suggested. Sharp and kind and good at the parts of the work that Robb found genuinely difficult. The Night's Watch. This was the line on the list that did not move to the completed column. Tyrion had sent 3 letters to Lord Commander Mormont in the past year, each one more specific than the last, each one attaching funding approved by Robb over the resistance of the Master of Coin. The letters said, "The reports are believed. The resources are coming. We are taking this seriously." Mormont had written back letters that were the letters of a man who had been sending reports into a void for 20 years, and had not yet adjusted to the experience of the void writing back. He needed men. He needed steel. He needed dragonglass. He needed the specific thing that was standing in the yards of the Red Keep and eating considerably and growing still. Castle Black. Mormont and Robb before the ranging. Mormont found Robb at the top of the wall. He had sent a man to find the king, and the man had reported the lords on the wall, and Mormont had gone himself, because some conversations required the altitude. Robb was at the northern edge of the battlements, looking at the dark. Mormont stood beside him. He had been at this wall for 20 years. He had sent ravens. He had written reports. He had edited those reports, feeling the specific shame of a man who knew the truth and softened it because the unfiltered truth had been ignored so many times that he had started managing it. 20 years of this. This 16-year-old had read the reports, come north, and arrived with dragons. He said, "First time at the wall?" Robb said, "My father brought me when I was 7. I thought it was too cold. And I thought it was the most important thing in the world, and nobody was treating it like the most important thing in the world." Mormont was quiet. He said, "Your father thought that too. Ned Stark sent me a raven the year before the trouble started. Not an official raven. He said, I've been reading the reports. I believe them. I don't yet have the political position to do what needs doing, but I intend to find it." He paused. He never found it. Robb said, "He ran out of time." Mormont said, "Yes. The north spread out below them, the dark, the forest, the specific wrongness that had a direction." Robb said, "Tell me what you think about the engagement, not what the historians will say. What you think, standing here." Mormont said, "The army is the problem you see. The Night King is the problem behind it. Every man I've sent north has gone for what he could see and died for what he couldn't." He looked at the dark. "The old accounts say the last hero went for the source, not with an army, small, fast, the right tool for the specific problem." Robb said, "2 dragons." Mormont said, "2 dragons. 1 rider who can see through the noise." He looked at Robb. "The boy." Robb said, "Yes." Mormont said, "He's 8 years old." Robb said, "He knows things the rest of us can't see. He went into the crypts alone and found 2 dragons that had been waiting for 8,000 years and sat down on the floor and said hello." He paused. "That's what we have." Mormont was quiet. He said, "My brothers, the men of the Watch, they need to know. This is for them. 20 years of being told to manage the reports carefully. 20 years of the South not coming." He looked at Robb. "They came when you came. The Watch needs to know that what happens tomorrow is for the men who didn't make it." Robb said, "I'll speak to them tonight." Mormont said, "Not a speech." Robb said, "No, I know." He sat with the brothers of the Night's Watch that night, and he asked them to tell him about the men who hadn't come back from the ranging. He asked for names, and he listened to the names, and he remembered them. He said, "Tomorrow is for them." Nobody said anything for a long time. Then someone at the back of the hall said, "I," and the rest of them said it. Robber. Ned's letter. What he carried. Ned had left letters. Not for every contingency. He hadn't known what the contingencies were going to be. Nobody ever did. But he had left letters the way he did everything. Quietly and thoroughly, and without announcing he was doing it. And the letters had been with Howland Reed, who gave them to Robb when the host made camp in the Neck. Robb had not read them immediately. He had carried them for a week. The sealed packet of them, in the inside pocket of his riding jacket. He had thought about them at night and not opened them. He opened them the morning after the battle at the Whispering Wood. He sat in his tent with Ghost at his feet and opened the first letter. It was addressed to him. It said, "Robb, if you are reading this, I am gone. I'm sorry for that. I tried to manage the situation and I ran out of road. The dragons in the crypts are real. I found out about them in the autumn, and I have been carrying the knowledge since. I don't know what to do with them yet, which is why I haven't told you. I haven't told anyone except your mother, who is dealing with the practical questions in the way she deals with practical questions, which is better than I would. I want to say something about Bran. Not the dragons. About Bran himself. He has always known things he shouldn't have been able to know. You've noticed this. So have I. So has your mother, though she manages it differently. I don't entirely understand what he is. And that's the most honest thing I can tell you. I have held him and known him for 8 years, and I don't entirely understand what he is. but I trust what he is. That's the thing your grandfather taught me, that I want to pass to you. When you don't understand something, you can still trust it. Understanding comes later. Trust it first. I want to say something about the war. You're going to win, or you're going to lose. And I cannot know which from where I am writing this. If you're winning, don't let the winning make you easy. The South will try to make you Southern. Don't. The North is the thing. The North as a way of being. Not just the North as a place. And you are the North, and stay it. I love you. I didn't say it enough. I was always going to say it more later. Father. Robb read it twice. He folded it back and returned it to the packet. He kept the packet on him for the rest of the campaign. Through the Whispering Wood and the Mummer's Ford and the negotiations and the ride to King's Landing and the throne room and all of it. He kept it in the inside pocket of whatever jacket he was wearing. He never mentioned it to anyone. When they were at Castle Black, the night before the crossing, he took it out in his room and held it. He didn't read it again. He just held it for a while. Then he put it back. In the morning, he went to the wall. The night before, Catelyn and Bran. She went to him after supper. He was in the yard beside Greywing, not doing anything visible, just present, paying attention in the way that had stopped surprising her and had started feeling like the most Bran thing about Bran. She sat beside him. She said, "I need to say some things to you." He said, "All right." She said, "I have been afraid for you since the day you were born. Every child is a specific fear, shaped like that child. You have always been the one whose specific shape I understood least." He said, "I know." She said, "The fall. After the fall, when you were in the crypt with the fever, I thought you were gone. And then you weren't. And you came back different. And I told myself the difference was the injury." He said, "The difference was what I saw." She said, "I know that now." He said, "While I was in the fever, I saw things. I've been seeing things since then. Not visions. It's more like the world is slightly more transparent than it used to be. I can see things through it." She said, "What do you see when you look north?" He said, "The cold, the army, the thing that makes the army." He paused. "And the dragons. What the dragons can do to it." She said, "Is it enough?" He said, "Yes." He said it with the flat certainty he always had. "It will be enough. North and Greywing together, going for the source. Robb comes with me. He keeps the ground safe while I find the right direction." He paused. "Greywing knows where to go. I know how to follow her. Robb knows how to keep everything else from becoming a problem. The three of us are right for this." She said, "You're 8 years old." He said, "I know." She said, "That matters. It will always matter to me. Whatever you know, whatever you can see, you are 8 years old, and you are my son, and those two facts are the most important facts I have." He looked at her. She said, "I'm not trying to stop you. I stopped trying to stop you when I understood what you were. I'm telling you." She put her hand on his face. "You are my son, and I love you in the specific way I love you, which is not the same as how I love the others, and is not less. Come back," he said. "I will," she said, not trying, not intending. "Come back," he said. "I'll come back." She held him for a moment, the way of someone who understood they were holding someone who was also much larger than they appeared, someone who fit in her arms and also somewhere else entirely. She let him go. She went inside. He stayed with Greywing until the light was gone. Beyond the wall. What happened? The accounts differ on the specifics. This is how it is with significant events. The people who were there are changed by having been there, and the change affects how they remember, and the remembering and the changing are not separable. What Mormont reported, the dragons crossed the wall at first light. The cold air above the wall was immediately hostile in a way that did not affect North or Greywing, but that was visible to the rangers on the battlements. The two dragons flew north for 2 hours and were lost to sight. The cold pressure, which had been building for weeks, increased for approximately 4 hours and then ceased entirely. What Robb reported, the army of the dead was larger than the ranging estimates. It moved with the organized deliberateness of something directed from a central source. North took the flanks in the approach, driving the dead back by the combination of fire and displaced air that had worked at the ford, and Greywing went for the center. Bran sat between the dragon's wings, with his eyes closed through most of it. What Bran reported? Nothing immediately. He did not speak when he came back over the wall. He went to sleep beside Greywing in the castle black yard and slept for 14 hours. In the morning he said, "The Night King is gone. The things he was directing will stop." He said, "North showed me what the fire could do that I couldn't see from the ground. You have to go for the source. The army is what the source makes. The army never ends. The source ends." He said, Greywing knew exactly where to go. She's always known. That's what the waiting was for. He said, "We can go home now." Catelyn, who had been standing at the back of the room, said, "Are you hurt?" He said, "No." She said, "Are you?" He said, "I'm fine. We're both fine." He looked at her. "I told you." She said, "You told me." He said, "I always come back." She said, "Yes." He said, "Did Sansa's raven come this morning?" She said, "Yes." "The Tyrells have agreed to the grain terms. The Iron Bank sent a representative. Sansa is managing it." He said, "Good." He went to breakfast. Home. What came after? They came back south in the second week of spring. 2 dragons above the road and 50 miles of army below them, and the specific quality of a force that has done something large and is carrying the knowledge of it. Robb rode north. Below him the realm spread out the way it looked from above. Not the clean borders of maps, but the actual topography. The rivers and the forests and the roads and the villages. The villages in the Riverlands, some still marked from the Lannister march, being rebuilt with the particular stubborn, northern patience of people who rebuild because that is what you did after things came apart. He thought about the 16 months since he had ridden out of Winterfell with 50,000 men and 2 creatures that nobody had known existed. He thought about his father. He thought about Ned Stark, who had carried the secret of the dragons for months and had died before he could use them, who had known what was under Winterfell and had not known what to do with it and had run out of time to figure it out. He thought, "Father, we used them right." He thought, "Father, we went north." He thought, "I don't know if this is what you would have done. I know it's what I had to do." He thought, "I hope that's enough." Below him, on the road, Bran rode Greywing beside him, and the 9-year-old and the dragon moved together with the ease of 2 things that had always been the same thing. And the year's warmth was coming into the land below them, and the cold that had been wrong for 30 years was just cold now. North banked south. Robb let him bank. They went home. King's Landing. What Robb wrote. He wrote it himself. Not the official version. The Maesters would produce that later, polished and authorized and simplified. He wrote the real one. The version that included Bran going down the stairs and sitting on the floor. The version that included Robb spending 11 days failing to look for the lever and 1 day stopping. The version that included Catelyn writing a raven while Robb was still working out the argument she'd already won. He wrote the names of everyone who was there, not just the lords, every ranger, every soldier, every person who had stood at the ford watching 2 creatures fly over and had decided the calculation had changed. He wrote Ned Stark's name and what Ned had been reaching toward, and that he had run out of time, and that the running out of time was not the ending of it. He wrote, "My father knew." He knew something was in the crypts, though he did not know what, and he was finding his way toward the right moment to act, and he did not find it, and his children found it for him. That is not a failure. That is how it works. The reaching matters even when the reaching does not finish. The next person picks it up. He wrote Bran's name first. He wrote, Bran Stark, who went down the stairs alone and said hello. 8 years old. The North recognized him. The waiting was for him. He showed it to Catelyn. She read it. She put it down. She said, he'll read this someday. Robb said, that's what I want. She said, he's going to be embarrassed about the hello. Robb said, he should be proud of the hello. She said, I know. She looked at the document. It's good. He said, it's accurate. She said, those are the same thing. When it matters. The Small Council, a Tuesday, 300 House EE. The council met at the usual hour, and Arya was in the wrong chair. Not Sansa's chair. She'd avoided that with the specific precision of someone doing something deliberately and wanting it to look accidental. She was in the chair Lady Mormont used when she was in the city, which Lady Mormont was not currently occupying because Lady Mormont was in the north, and Arya had sat in it with Needle across her lap, and the expression of someone who had decided this was fine. Nobody asked her to move. Robb went through the agenda. Supply situations. The Night's Watch resupply. 3 petitions from Lords. A question from the Iron Bank. Jon sat at the head of the table and listened and occasionally said things, and mostly let the council run. He had learned this in the first 6 months. A good council runs itself, and the king's job is to make the decision when the council can't agree, and to be listening well enough to make it correctly. Midway through the Iron Bank question, Tyrion was explaining something complicated about letters of credit. Arya interrupted. She said, the Iron Bank backed the wrong side in the war. Everyone looked at her. She said, we won. They were backing Joffrey through the Lannister credit lines. That means they're in a bad position. She looked at Tyrion. Tell them the new arrangement comes with a favorable rate, or we go to the Braavosi banking families directly. The Braavosi will deal. Tyrion looked at her with the specific expression he had when someone said something he'd been thinking himself and hadn't said yet. He said, yes, that's correct. I was getting there. You were building up to it, Arya said. I don't have time for building up. Lady Arya, someone started. Not a lady. She said it without heat. Factual. Robb was looking at his cup. He kept his face neutral. He met his mother's eyes across the table, and Catelyn also had a very neutral face. Tyrion said to the council, Lady Arya's instinct is correct. I'll approach the Iron Bank with the framing she suggested. Sansa, who had been watching all of this with the expression of someone taking notes she will use later, said, she should come to the next trade negotiation. Arya looked at her. Sansa looked back. You read situations quickly. That's useful in a negotiation. A pause. Fine, Arya said. Fine, Sansa said. Robb moved to the next item. After the meeting, in the corridor, Catelyn fell into step beside him. The council, she said. I know. It's currently composed of your brother, 2 of your sisters, a former enemy, a woman from Bear Island who's here half the year, and me. That's accurate. People are going to say it looks like a family business. Robb considered this. It is a family business. Robb, the realm is a family business. It's always been a family business. The Targaryens ran it as a family business. The Baratheons ran it as a family business. He shrugged. At least mine are competent. She was quiet for a moment. Arya, she said. Yes. She's going to be difficult. She's already difficult. She's been difficult since she was 5. He looked at her. She's also right about the Iron Bank. Tyrion knew it. He was just being Tyrion about it. She sat in Lady Mormont's chair. Lady Mormont can tell her when she's back. She will. Then it'll be fine. Robb pushed open the door to his solar. I need to write to Marjorie. She wants input on the Reach negotiations. Catelyn followed him in. You've gotten better at this, she said. Marginally. More than marginally. She looked at him. Your father would be... Robb kept writing. After a moment, she stopped. She didn't need to finish the sentence. He already knew. And she knew. He already knew. And the knowing was the thing that sat between them always. The grief and the gratitude and the shape of what Ned Stark had built in both of them, and what they were doing with it. They sat in the solar. Robb wrote. Catelyn watched the city through the window. Outside, King's Landing moved through its afternoon in the particular way it was learning to move, which was less frantic than before, and not yet comfortable, and still making its accommodation with whoever these northern people were and what kind of city they were building. One thing at a time. That was the only way. One thing at a time, and then the next thing. And then the next, until the work was done, or you were. And either way, you'd done what you could with what you had. Robb had learned this from his father. So had the rest of them. Robb Ned's letter, what he carried. Ned had left letters. Not for every contingency. He hadn't known what the contingencies were going to be. Nobody ever did. But he had left letters the way he did everything, which was quietly and thoroughly, and without announcing he was doing it. And the letters had been with Howland Reed, who had given them to Robb the night he arrived in camp. Robb had not read them immediately. He had carried them for a week, the sealed packet of them, in the inside pocket of his riding jacket, and he had thought about them at night and not opened them. He opened them the morning after the battle at the Whispering Wood. He sat in his tent with Ghost at his feet. Ghost had come south with the host and had been ranging ahead in the night and returning at dawn, which Robb had stopped questioning and started relying on. And he opened the first letter. It was addressed to him. It said, "Robb, if you are reading this, I am gone. I'm sorry for that. I tried to manage the situation and I ran out of road. You know I've never been good at managing situations. Your mother is better at that than I am. The dragons in the crypts are real. I found out about them in the autumn, and I have been carrying the knowledge since. I don't know what to do with them yet, which is why I haven't told you. I haven't told anyone except your mother, who is dealing with the practical questions in the way she deals with practical questions, which is better than I would. I want to say something about Jon, not the facts of it. You'll learn those when the time is right, or you'll learn them from someone else if I don't get there first. What I want to say is, he is the most honorable person I have ever known, and he doesn't know it, which is part of what makes it true. Watch how he treats people when nobody is watching. That's who he is. I want to say something about you. You are ready. You have been ready for longer than you think. The thing you're afraid of, that you'll get it wrong, that you'll make the wrong decision, that you'll be less than you need to be when it matters, that fear is the sign you're going to be all right. The people who don't have that fear are the ones who get it wrong. The fear keeps you honest. Your grandfather taught me to be honest. He didn't teach it as a lesson. He lived it, and I watched, and I understood. That's how it's passed, not through instruction, but through example. Watch yourself become the example. The dragons. Use them for the north. Whatever they are, whatever they were in the old accounts. They were here before us and they'll be here after us, and they know something we don't. Trust what they know. I love you. I didn't say it enough. I was always going to say it more later, and I ran out of later. So I love you, and I'm proud of you. And the North is in good hands. Father. Robb read it twice. He folded it and put it back in the packet. He put the packet in the inside pocket of his jacket. He sat in the tent for a while. Ghost came and put his head on Robb's knee. Robb put his hand on the wolf's head. He said, "To no one." He wrote that before he knew about the dragons, before he knew what I was going to be facing. Ghost looked at him with the amber eyes. Robb said, "He was right, though. He was right about all of it." He sat with the wolf until the tent began to warm with the morning. Then he went to see to the camp. Tyrion. Camp. The first morning, what he noticed. He had been in many war camps. He had been in his father's camps, which were the gold standard of war camps. organized with Tywin Lannister's characteristic comprehensive attention to logistics, where the supply chains worked and the men ate at the correct intervals, and the intelligence reports arrived in the correct order. His father's camps were the specific expression of a man who understood that wars were won by feeding people correctly, rather than by dramatic battlefield gestures. He had been in Robert Baratheon's camps, which were the gold standard of a different kind, organized around the king's needs and appetites, which were both large and which had a specific quality of managed chaos that produced good outcomes in the short term and terrible ones in the long term. Robb Stark's camp was something else. He walked through it on the first morning, before the meeting with Catelyn, with the specific attention he gave to environments he was trying to understand. He noticed the supply arrangements were better than they should have been for an army this size in the field this long. The men were fed, and their equipment was maintained, and the perimeter watch was on schedule, and the horses were handled with the care of people who understood that horses were the entire campaign. He noticed the officers did not look toward the command tent before making decisions. They made the decisions and reported them. The authority was distributed correctly. He noticed the men spoke of Robb Stark the way men spoke of commanders they trusted, which was mostly not loudly. Trust was quiet. It expressed itself not in proclamations but in the specific posture of men who had decided they didn't need to worry about the man at the top. He noticed the dragons. The dragons were in the designated area, the large open space at the west end of camp that had been cleared when the host arrived, and that nobody went near without a specific reason. North was sitting in the way North sat, which was with the absolute stillness of a large animal that was always paying attention. Greywing was moving in a slow circuit, which was how Greywing moved when there was nothing immediate to do. And in the center of the space, cross-legged on the ground, was an 8-year-old boy with his eyes closed. And there was no visible movement to him, but the quality of his stillness was the same quality as the dragon's stillness, which was not sleeping, not waiting, present. Tyrion watched this for a long time. He had read everything he could find about dragons in the 30 years he had been reading everything he could find about everything. He had the histories and the natural philosophy accounts, and the records from the Targaryen dynasty, and the specific frustrating lacunae in all of them, where the accounts said things like the bond was formed, and the rider and the dragon became one, and did not explain what this meant in any useful, practical sense. Looking at Bran Stark sitting cross-legged in the dirt beside two creatures that had been asleep for 8,000 years, he thought he understood something the accounts had been trying and failing to explain, which was, the bond wasn't mystical. It wasn't magical in the way of the stories. It was the same kind of bond that existed between the direwolf and the Stark children. The bond of two creatures that were the same kind of thing finding each other. Recognition. Not training. Not taming. Recognition. He had spent 30 years in a world that was organized entirely around the wrong questions. Who had the gold? Who had the soldiers? Who had the alliances and the marriages and the political architecture of claims and counterclaims and the specific machinery of power as the Lannisters understood it? The boy sitting in the dirt, communing with two dragons that had been waiting for 8,000 years for someone worth waking up for, was not organized around any of those questions. He was organized around the right question, which was, what is actually true? Tyrion thought, I have been waiting my entire life to work for someone organized around the right question. He went to his meeting with Catelyn Stark. He was, for the first time in 30 years, genuinely looking forward to work. The dragons, the war. What changed and what didn't? The war changed, and it didn't. It changed. The specific military engagements that the dragons made different. The battle at the Whispering Wood, where 40 minutes replaced what would have been a weeks-long campaign at significant cost. The Mummers Ford, where Gregor Clegane's column was scattered without a ground engagement. The series of smaller engagements in the Riverlands, where Robb's ability to see everything from above and communicate it in near real time produced outcomes that no tactical manual described, because no tactical manual had been written for this situation. It didn't change the specific political complexity of a realm at war with itself. The lords who needed convincing. the allies who needed managing, the enemies who were still enemies, regardless of what flew overhead. The specific human problem of 50,000 men who ate and needed boots and had families they'd left behind and who were loyal right now, in the flush of early victories, but whose loyalty was not infinite. None of that changed. What changed were the calculations. The calculation that said, we can fight this for 3 years and lose slowly, or we can fight it for 6 months with 2 dragons and win cleanly. That calculation changed. The calculation that said, we need the Freys, we need the Boltons, we need everyone whose loyalty is for sale rather than given. That calculation changed. They needed fewer people whose loyalty was for sale because they needed fewer total resources to win. That meant they could afford to be more selective. That meant the people who came to the Stark cause came for reasons other than the immediate advantage of it. This mattered. It mattered for the war, and it mattered more for what came after. Catelyn had understood this from the beginning and had been structuring the campaign around it. She had been saying to Robb, "You don't need everyone. You need the right people. The dragons mean you can afford to be right." Robb had learned to believe her. The specific moment he learned to believe her was not dramatic. It was a Tuesday morning in the Riverlands when a lord arrived at camp with 300 swords and a speech about honor and loyalty and the ancient Stark name bond going back 4 generations, and Catelyn had listened to the speech and then said, "What do you want?" The lord had said, "I'm offering." She had said, "I know what you're offering. What do you want?" A pause. Then, "The debt my father owed to House Frey. Forgiven." She had looked at him for a moment. She had said, "That debt predates you. You didn't make it. You shouldn't be carrying it." She had paused. "Forgiven. Welcome to the cause." He had blinked. He had said, "That's it." She had said, "What did you expect?" He had said, "Negotiation." She had said, "I don't negotiate with things that should be given." She had looked at him steadily. "Come in. Feed your men." He had come in. Robb had watched this from the corner of the tent and had thought, there it is. That's the difference between a campaign that wins and a campaign that wins well. He had not been able to articulate it before this moment, and now he could. He had written to Sansa that night. He had told her what had happened and what he had understood from it. She had written back, "Yes, that's what Mother does. She finds the thing that should be given and gives it before anyone has to ask. That's why people follow her." He had written, "Father did the same thing." She had written, "Yes, that's where she learned it." He had sat with this for a long time. He thought about his father sitting on the throne of Winterfell, hearing petitions, and the specific thing Ned did that nobody talked about, which was that before anyone finished making their argument, he had already found the part of it that was true, and the part of it that was just performance, and he spoke to the true part and let the performance exhaust itself. He thought, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to do that. He thought, I'm not there yet. He thought, I'll keep trying. Sansa. King's Landing. Managing things. In the year after the arrival, Sansa managed things. Not Robb's things, those she helped with, advising and writing and building the specific diplomatic architecture of the Reach Alliance. But Robb was present for those, deciding and executing and getting better at it by the week. She managed other things. She managed the city. Not the military security of it, not the grain supply. Those were Tyrion's domain, and she let him keep them, because Tyrion was genuinely excellent at them, and there was no value in competing for territory you couldn't improve. What she managed was the specific social infrastructure of the capital, which was less visible than the grain supply, and more consequential in the long run. She had understood, in her 6 months as Joffrey's hostage, that cities ran on information and relationships, and that the official channels of information and relationships were the surface, and that the actual decisions were made in the off-channel moments, at meals, in corridors, in the brief conversations between appointments where people said what they actually thought rather than what they decided to say. She had mapped those channels in King's Landing over 6 months. She had the map. She used it. She knew which lords were genuinely committed to the new arrangement and which were managing an alliance of convenience. She knew which of the city's great houses had daughters who were available, and which marriages would build the right bonds. She knew which merchants had relationships with which reach houses, and what those relationships implied about grain supply flexibility. She knew things about specific members of the small council that she held rather than used, not because she was waiting to use them, but because having them was what you needed to be useful. She was 13 years old. Tyrion had said to her once, during the first month, "You're remarkably good at this." She had said, "I had 6 months in a very difficult school." He had said, "Most people come out of that school broken." She had said, "Most people go into it already broken in one direction, and it breaks them in the other. I wasn't broken." She had paused. "I was naive. That's different." He had looked at her. She had said, "I had the specific naivety of someone raised in a household that worked correctly. I thought the world worked the way Winterfell worked. I was wrong about that. But having known how things could work, having the comparison, meant that when I saw how they actually worked, I could understand what was wrong and why." He had been quiet for a moment. He had said, "That's not how most people describe trauma." She had said, "I'm not describing trauma. I'm describing education." He had looked at her with the expression he had when someone said something that landed in a different place than expected. He had said, "You're going to be very good at this." She had said, "I already am." He had said, "Yes, I know. I'm noting it for my own records." She had said, "Is your record keeping of me useful?" He had said, "Apparently not. You already know everything in it." She had said, "Most of it, not all of it." He had said, "Which part don't you know?" She had said, "What you're actually afraid of." He had been quiet. She had said, "Not what you're afraid of politically, what you're actually afraid of." He had looked at his cup. He had said, "Getting to the end of my life and finding out all the intelligence I've accumulated didn't actually matter. That I was very smart and very well informed, and none of it made any difference." She had looked at him. She had said, "It's making a difference now." He had said, "Yes, I know." He had looked at the window. "That's the most frightening thing. That it actually might work this time. That I might have found the thing worth spending the intelligence on." He had paused. "If this fails after I've found the right place to put it," she had said, "it won't fail." He had said, "You sound certain." She had said, "I am certain." She had looked at him. "Not because I'm naive. Because I know what we have. We have Robb, who gets better every week. We have my mother, who is the most capable person in the room in every room she's in. We have Bran, who is... whatever Bran is, it's real, and it works." She had paused. "And we have you. Which means we have someone who has spent 30 years watching everything go wrong and knows exactly where the failure points are." She had held his gaze. "That's what we have. That works." He had said after a moment, "You're 13 years old." She had said, "Yes." He had said, "Is this what you're going to be like at 20? She had said, "I have no idea. I'm trying to be this at 13, and trust that whatever comes after that is informed by it." He had said, "That's..." He had stopped. "That's a good answer." She had said, "Thank you." She had gone back to the letter she was writing. Winterfell Rickon, what he found. Rickon found something in the crypts on the 43rd day. Not another dragon. He had gone down looking, and had been looking since Bran left, and he had been going methodically, with the specific 4-year-old's thoroughness of a child who has decided to do something correctly. He had been going level by level, chamber by chamber, stopping to look at everything before moving on. He had told Lewin, as promised. Lewin had come the first 3 times with him, carrying a torch and making notes in the careful maester's way. And then Lewin had said, "You don't need me anymore, do you?" Rickon had said, "I'm fine." Lewin had said, "Tell me what you find." Rickon had said, "I always do." He had continued alone. On the 43rd day, in a chamber 3 levels below the deepest known crypt, and 1 level above where Bran had found the dragons, he found a door. Not a doorway, actual old doors. Dark wood, bound with iron that had gone dark with age, but had not rusted, which was remarkable for a chamber that had been sealed long enough for the stone around it to settle completely. He stood in front of the door for a long time. He was 4 years old, and he was in the deep crypts alone, and he had been told many times in his short life that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the movement forward anyway. And he had understood this, more or less. And he understood it now more than more or less. He pushed the door. It moved. Not easily. The resistance of something that had been still for a very long time. The friction of age. But it moved. The chamber beyond was lit. Not with torchlight. The same amber light that Bran had described. The light that came from within, rather than from above. Rickon stood in the doorway. The chamber was full of records. Not scrolls. Not the parchment records that the Maesters made. Stone tablets. Dozens of them, arranged on the shelves that lined the walls, carved with characters that were not the common tongue, and not the runes of the first men, and were not any writing system that Maester Luwin had ever shown him. And at the center of the chamber, on a plinth of dark stone, a single tablet larger than the others, with a different quality of inscription. Deeper, more careful, the work of someone who had understood they were writing something that needed to last. Rickon could not read it. He did not need to read it. He had the specific certainty of a 4-year-old who has found something that was left for someone to find, and has understood that the someone was himself, or his family, which was the same thing. He sat down in the chamber. He sat with the records the way Bran sat with the dragons, the full attention, the patience that was beyond his age, but entirely his own. He sat there for 2 hours. Then he went up. He went to Luwin. He said, "I found a room. There are tablets. I can't read them, but you should see them." Luwin said, "What kind of tablets?" Rickon said, "The old kind." Luwin said, "How old?" Rickon said, "Very." He paused. "The oldest kind." Luwin looked at him. He put down what he was writing. He said, "Show me." They went down. Luwin stood in the chamber for a long time without speaking, which was even more remarkable than when he had been silent in the Chamber of the Dragons, because Luwin was rarely silent for long, and was never silent twice in the same year. He finally said, "This predates the Citadel's oldest records." Rickon said, "Yes." Luwin said, "The characters. This is not any writing system that survives. This is older than the first men account." Rickon said, "Yes." Luwin said, "How did you know to look here?" Rickon said, "Bran told me. There were always more things. He said that's what crypts were for, where the old things are kept until someone goes down to find them." Luwin looked at the 4-year-old. He said, "Your brother is—" Rickon said, "Very strange, I know, but he's usually right." Luwin said, "Yes." He looked at the records. "Yes, he is." He wrote to the Citadel that afternoon. The letter was long and contained more exclamation marks than were considered appropriate in scholarly correspondence. He received a reply in 3 weeks. The reply was also long and contained many exclamation marks, and the specific incredulity of people who had been told something they wanted very much to be true, and were afraid it was actually true. A delegation came to Winterfell within the month. They spent 2 years in the chamber. The work of translation is ongoing. What they have found, so far, is consistent with what Bran Stark said from the back of Grey Wing over the burning dead. The source ends the army. That's what the old knowledge says. That's what was left in the chamber for someone to find. Someone found it. The Godswood. Robb and Ghost. The evening before the Northern Campaign. He went to the Godswood the evening before. Not the King's Landing. Godswood. The Stark Godswood only existed at Winterfell, and they were not at Winterfell. What existed here was a small sept converted for northern worship, which was not the same thing, and he had never been comfortable in it, and so he went instead to the small courtyard behind the eastern wing of the Red Keep, where someone had planted a weirwood sapling 30 years ago for reasons that nobody remembered, and that had grown slowly in the southern climate, and had never become the thing it was meant to be. He sat beside the tree. Ghost sat beside him. The wolf had been strange since they returned from the wall. Not wrong, strange, different strange, more settled. The specific quality of an animal that has been moving towards something for its whole life, and has arrived at it, and is now in the afterward, deciding what the afterward required. Robb understood that quality. He had been sitting with the same feeling since they came back south. He had done the thing. He had taken the host and the dragons and the war and the negotiations and the specific, impossible management of everything that was demanded of a 16-year-old king. And he had done it. And the dead were stopped, and the realm was not burning, and his family was alive. He had done it. And now, the afterward. He said to Ghost, "He said you'd get bigger." Ghost looked at him. He said, "Bran, when we found you, he said direwolves got very large." He looked at the wolf. He was right. Ghost's tail moved. He said, "I've been thinking about what comes next. Not the governance. I know what the governance looks like. Sansa has the list, and Mother has the bigger list, and Tyrion has the biggest list of all. And none of them agree on the order, but they all agree on the items." He paused. "I mean what comes next for the shape of it. What I'm building." Ghost waited. He said, "Father was building something. He didn't call it that. He'd never call it that. That's not how he talked about things. But he was. He was building a north that held. A north that could hold because it was governed honestly and treated the people in it with the respect that people deserved." He looked at the weirwood. He didn't finish it. He ran out of time and he didn't finish it. He said, "Mother is building something different. She's building the realm, not just the north, all of it. The working shape of a kingdom that doesn't eat its people. She's better at it than I am." He paused. "She's better at it than anyone I've ever seen. She should be doing this, not me. But she won't do it herself. She builds it for me and I do it, and somehow that's the right configuration." He said, "I don't know why that's the right configuration. I've been thinking about it for months. I think it's because..." He paused. "I think it's because I'm built the right way to carry it. The thing she's built requires someone to carry it who is genuinely not interested in the carrying, who carries it because it needs carrying, not because they want to be the carrier." He looked at Ghost. "I don't want this, but I'm the right person to have it. Those two things are both true." Ghost leaned against him. He said, "She told me, before she left for the negotiations. She said, the dragons are going to be the thing people remember. They're going to write histories about the dragons. They're going to say the Starks won because of the dragons." He paused. "That's not what happened." He sat with the weirwood and the wolf and the quiet. He said, "What happened is, Bran went down the stairs alone. And Bran was the kind of person who could go down the stairs alone because the Starks built the kind of family that made him that kind of person. And the Starks built that kind of family because my grandfather built it, and my father built it, and my mother built it, and all the grandmothers and grandfathers before them built it." He paused. "The dragons are what the building produced, not the cause, the result." Ghost made a sound. Not a howl, not a bark. The low, resonant sound that he sometimes made at the end of things. The sound of an animal acknowledging something. Robb sat with him until the courtyard went dark. Then he went inside. He had work to do in the morning. Winterfell. Rickon. What he found. Rickon found something in the crypts on the 43rd day. Not another dragon. He had been going down looking since Bran left, methodically, level by level, chamber by chamber, stopping to look at everything before moving on. He had told Lewin, as Bran made him promise. Lewin had come the first 3 times, carrying a torch and making notes in the careful Meister's way. Then Lewin had said, "You don't need me anymore, do you?" Rickon had said, "I'm fine." Lewin had said, "Tell me what you find." He had continued alone. On the 43rd day, in a chamber 3 levels below the deepest known crypt, he found a door. Not a doorway. Actual old doors, dark wood, bound with iron that had gone the deep brown of metal that had been still a very long time but had not rusted, which was remarkable for a chamber that should have been sealed for centuries. He stood in front of the door for a long time. He was 4 years old, and he was in the deep crypts alone, and he understood, at a level below thought, that what was on the other side of this door was important. He pushed. It moved. The resistance of something that had been still a very long time. But it moved. The chamber beyond was lit, not with torchlight, the same amber light that Bran had described, the light that came from within rather than from above. The chamber was full of records, not scrolls, not parchment, stone tablets. Dozens of them, arranged on shelves that lined the walls, carved with characters that were not the common tongue, and not the runes of the first men, and were not any writing system Maester Luwin had ever shown him. At the center of the chamber, on a plinth of dark stone, a single tablet larger than the others. A different quality of inscription. Deeper, more careful. The work of someone who had understood they were writing something that needed to last. Rickon could not read it. He sat down on the chamber floor. He sat the way Bran sat with the dragons, the full attention, the patience that was beyond his age but entirely his own. He sat there for 2 hours. Then he went up. He went straight to Luwin. He said, "I found a room. There are tablets. I can't read them." Luwin said, "What kind of tablets?" Rickon said, "The old kind." Luwin said, "How old?" Rickon said, "The oldest kind." Luwin put down what he was writing. He said, "Show me." They went down. Luwin stood in the chamber for a long time without speaking. When he finally spoke, he said, "This predates the Citadel's oldest records." Rickon said, "Yes." Luwin said, "The characters. This is older than the First Men accounts. This is older than anything the Citadel has catalogued." He turned to look at the 4-year-old. "How did you know to look here?" Rickon said, "Bran told me there were always more things. He said that's what crypts were for, where the old things are kept until someone goes down to find them." Luwin looked at him for a long moment. He said, "Your brother is—" Rickon said, "Very strange. I know. But he's usually right." Luwin said, "Yes." He looked at the records again. "Yes, he is." He wrote to the Citadel that afternoon. The letter was long and contained more exclamation marks than scholarly correspondence was supposed to allow. The reply arrived in 3 weeks. It was also long. A delegation came to Winterfell within the month and spent 2 years in that chamber. The work of translation is ongoing. What they have found so far is this. The tablets describe what lives beyond the wall and what ends it. The same instruction in different forms, repeated across dozens of carved stone pages, as though whoever wrote them understood that writing it once was not enough. As though they were writing for people who would forget and need to be told again. The source ends the army. The army never ends. The source ends. That was what Bran had said from the back of Greywing over the burning dead, before anyone had read the tablets, before anyone knew the chamber existed. Luwin thought about that for a long time. He thought, the Starks have been carrying this for 8,000 years without knowing what they were carrying. He thought, and still, they carried it correctly. The Small Council. What Arya said. On the Tuesday after they came back from the wall, the Small Council met at the usual hour, and Arya was in the wrong chair. Not Sansa's chair. She had avoided that with the specific precision of someone doing something deliberately and wanting it to look accidental. Lady Mormont's chair, which Lady Mormont was not currently occupying because Lady Mormont had gone home for the season, and Arya had sat in it with Needle across her lap, and the expression of someone who had decided this was fine. Nobody asked her to move. Robb went through the agenda. Midway through the Iron Bank question, Tyrion was explaining something complicated about letters of credit. Arya interrupted. She said, "The Iron Bank backed the wrong side in the war." Everyone looked at her. She said, "We won." They were backing Joffrey through the Lannister credit lines. That means they're in a bad position. She looked at Tyrion. Tell them the new arrangement comes with a favorable rate, or we go to the Braavosi banking families directly. The Braavosi will deal. Tyrion looked at her with the specific expression he had when someone said something he had been thinking himself and hadn't said yet. He said, "That's... yes. I was getting there." "You were building up to it," Arya said. "I don't have time for building up." "Lady Arya," someone started. "Not a lady." Factual, without heat. Robb was looking at his cup, face neutral. He met his mother's eyes across the table, and Catelyn had the same expression. Tyrion said, ignoring the interruption with the practiced ease of someone who has been interrupted in councils for decades. "Lady Arya's instinct is correct. I'll approach the Iron Bank with the framing she suggested." Sansa, who had been watching all of this with the expression of someone taking careful notes, said, "She should come to the next trade negotiation." Arya looked at her. Sansa looked back. "You read situations quickly. That's useful in a negotiation." A pause. "Fine," Arya said. "Fine," Sansa said. Robb moved to the next item. After the meeting in the corridor, Catelyn fell into step beside him. "The council," she said. "I know. It's currently composed of your brother, 2 of your sisters, a former enemy, a woman from Bear Island, and me." "That's accurate. People are going to say it looks like a family business." Robb considered this. "It is a family business." "Robb, the realm is a family business. It always has been. The Targaryens ran it as one. The Baratheons ran it as one." He shrugged. "At least mine are competent." She was quiet for a moment. "Arya," she said. "Yes. She's going to be difficult. She's already difficult. She's been difficult since she was 5. He looked at her. "She's also right about the Iron Bank." Tyrion knew it. He was just being Tyrion about it. She sat in Lady Mormont's chair. "Lady Mormont can tell her when she's back. She will. Then it'll be fine." They walked in silence for a moment. Catelyn said, "Your father would be..." Robb kept walking. After a moment, she stopped. She didn't need to finish the sentence. He already knew. And she knew. He already knew. And the knowing was the thing that sat between them always. The grief and the gratitude and the shape of what Ned Stark had built in both of them and what they were doing with it. The Godswood. Sir Robb Etiaus, the evening after. He went to the small courtyard behind the eastern wing that evening, where someone had planted a weirwood sapling 30 years ago for reasons that nobody remembered, and that had grown slowly in the southern climate, and had never become the thing it was meant to be, but was still there, still growing, still pushing through the southern heat with the stubborn patience of a northern tree that had not been told it couldn't. Ghost sat beside him. He said, to no one. He said, "You'd get bigger." Ghost looked at him. He said, "Bran, when we found you." He said, "Direwolves got very large." A pause. He was right. Ghost's tail moved. He said, "I've been thinking about what we built. Not the governance. I know what the governance looks like. There are 3 lists, and nobody agrees on the order, but they all agree on the items. I mean the shape of it. What comes after?" Ghost waited. He said, "Father was building something. He didn't call it that. He'd never call it that. But he was. He was building a north that held because it was governed honestly and treated the people in it with the respect that people deserved." He looked at the weirwood. "He didn't finish it. He ran out of time." He said, "I used to think that was the tragedy. The running out of time." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't think that anymore. I think he got it far enough. I think he got it to the point where we could pick it up, which is..." He stopped. "Which is what the work is. You get it far enough that the next person can pick it up. You're not supposed to finish it yourself. You're supposed to hand it forward." He said, "The dragons have been in the crypts for 8,000 years. They didn't finish the work the first time. They went back under and waited. They waited for the next person to pick it up. and the next, and the next. And eventually, Bran. He paused. I don't think they were waiting for Bran specifically. I think they were waiting for someone specific enough. Someone who would go down the stairs alone and sit on the cold floor and say hello without performing it. He looked at Ghost. They were waiting for North, and North finally produced the right person for the specific moment they needed. He said, that's what we are. That's what we've always been. Not destined. Not chosen. Just North. Reliable. Going down the stairs when the stairs go down somewhere important. Sitting on the floor when sitting on the floor is what's required. He paused. I can do that. I can be that. Ghost leaned against him. He said, Mother is building something different. She's building the realm. Not just the North, all of it. The working shape of a kingdom that doesn't eat its people. She's better at it than I am. She's better at it than anyone I've seen. He paused. She builds it for me, and I carry it. And somehow, that's the right configuration. I've been thinking about why for months. He said, I think it's because I'm built the right way to carry it. The thing she's building requires someone who is genuinely not interested in the carrying. Who carries it because it needs carrying. Not because they want to be the one carrying it. He looked at Ghost. I don't want this. But I'm the right person to have it. Those two things are both true. Ghost leaned against him. He said, She told me. Before she left for the negotiations, she said, the dragons are going to be what people remember. The histories will say the Starks won because of the dragons. They'll be wrong. He sat with the weirwood and the wolf and the quiet. He said, what happened is, Bran went down the stairs alone. And Bran was the kind of person who could go down the stairs alone because we built the kind of family that made him that kind of person. And we built that kind of family because my grandfather built it, and my father built it, and my mother built it, and all the grandmothers and grandfathers before them built it. He paused. The dragons are what the building produced, not the cause. The result. Ghost made a sound. Not a howl. Not a bark. The low, resonant sound he sometimes made at the end of things. The sound of an animal acknowledging something. Robb sat until the courtyard went dark. Then he went inside. He had the morning letters to write. He had the budget review with Tyrion. He had the watch resupply to sign and the Reach correspondence to answer, and the 47 families who had not yet received a personal letter from the king, which was not something he was going to let slip past a month. He had the work. He went to do it. What if the Starks had dragons during the War of the Five Kings? They didn't have them the way the Targaryens had them. The Targaryens had dragons as weapons, as inheritance, as the specific fire and blood expression of a dynasty built on the fact of them. The Starks had something else. They had two creatures in the crypts under their house. They had Bran, who went down the stairs because something pulled him and sat on the floor and said hello. They had Robb, who spent 14 days in the deepest chamber, learning what it meant to stop looking for the lever. They had Catelyn, who read a raven about creatures sleeping under her children's bedroom and made the calculation that ended the war in 6 months instead of the 5 years that alternatives produced. They had Sansa, who paid attention in an enemy court and came out knowing more about how power worked than most lords learned in a lifetime. They had Arya, who arrived from wherever she'd been with a sword and opinions and her father's face and her mother's precision. They had what the North had always had, which was endurance and honesty and the specific, unglamorous willingness to do what needs doing when it needs doing without waiting for it to be comfortable. The dragons were not the reason the Starks won. The dragons were what happened when the Starks, being who they were, encountered something very old that was waiting for someone worth waking up for. The North woke them up. The North put them to use. The North came home. Not with fire and glory. Not with the triumph the histories would eventually make of it. With 50,000 tired men and 2 dark-scaled dragons landing in a courtyard,
discovering
and a
that parents
16-year-old
can be
sitting in
managed.
an iron chair that hurt his back,
Come inside.
trying to figure out what the next thing
Your father
was.
wants you cleaned up
That
before
was the
King
whole of
Robert
it.
arrives.
That was enough.
Bran went inside.